All right. So welcome everyone. My name is Ebony Rose Thompson. I'm the chair of the Ward 7 Education Council. I'm super glad that you all could join us today. This is our September general body meeting. So we're back from probably what did not feel like a break for a lot of people. So thank you all for joining us. I want to make sure I recognize the board members we have on the call. So I see Laura, I see Nzinga. Am I missing anybody? No? Okay, awesome. So I want to recognize the two board members we have on the call. I also want to acknowledge that we are probably going to have a lot of conversation today, which is one of the reasons I wanted us to go ahead and get started. And so just want to let you know how we've been running these meetings since we've gone to virtual. We encourage people to put questions in the chat. We have gotten really good at monitoring the chat, y'all. And so we don't tend to be in the habit of like screening the questions. I will say it has become super efficient, and we get more questions asked and answered via Zoom than we do in person. So have a little bit of faith in our process, and please type questions and comments into the chat. We are splitting this kind of into a two-part meeting. So we're going to have the Chancellor, Dr. Louis Ferebee, and our new Public Charter School Executive Director, Miss Michelle. Do you go by Walker Davis? Yes. Okay, awesome. Nice to meet you. Ms. Walker Davis, do their intros and start that panel first, and then we'll switch over to the second panel. Are there any questions about that? Okay, well, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We're going to have both Dr. Ferebee and Dr. Walker Davis introduce themselves and give a little bit of background about what they're going to cover today, and then we'll open up for questions. I don't want to like cold call anybody, so I don't know which one of you wants to jump in first.
This is Louis, just checking to see you can hear me. Ebony, thumbs up, you can hear me? Yeah, so happy to start. Louis Ferebee, Chancellor DCPS, and we're completing our 4th day of school for the first week of school in very uncharted territory, as this is the first time we started a school year in an all virtual posture. Reminder that DCPS is in learning at home until the end of the first term at least, and we're continuing to evaluate health conditions and also explore possibilities for in-person experiences for students and potentially childcare for students as a ramp up to term 2, which starts on November 9th. I am in my 2nd year serving in this capacity, was named Chancellor DCPS in 2018. As we think about where we are in this first week, I just want to reiterate my gratitude to the DCPS families, the DCPS staff and school leaders, from my vantage point, has really given us their best effort to start the school year strong and to give all of our students and families what they need to begin the school year well. We had 3 planning priorities that we utilized throughout the summer and spring that was rooted in engagement with all of our stakeholders, and we touched over 17,000 stakeholders, being students, families, and staff. And those 3 planning priorities were to continue to prioritize health and safety. And we are continuing to prepare for reopening in person by taking a number of steps to ensure health and safety is at the forefront, from protective equipment to also modifications to our HVAC systems for appropriate filtering, and a number of other supports as we look to welcoming staff and students back into our buildings. We have given principals guidance. It's important to note that if a particular staff member cannot work from home for whatever reason, or prefer to work from a building, to start to utilize buildings for staff to work from. And as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to try to work our way into in-person experiences for students. The second planning priority is around ensuring we maximize learning time, whether that be learning at home, learning at school, One of our points of pride is our Canvas platform that includes course companions and a wealth of information for students to go to a one-stop shop to access all of their learning materials. We continue to also think about how we can utilize this moment when there's racial unrest and we're battling the pandemic. And so we are launching and have launched a Living Through History curriculum that gives students opportunity to reflect and to talk and write about some of the experiences they're experiencing right now in a very challenging time. And then finally, the last lens is the lens of equity, ensuring that we continue to acknowledge that we have students from various backgrounds who have unique needs. Some highlights from Ward 7, really proud of SUSA. They are producing amazing, what we call tip sheets and checklists that are faring well with students and families in terms of what to do to be ready and how to be ready for the school year. Ron Brown welcomed a new principal this year and their newest Young Kings and had an amazing ceremony to welcome in a new group of ninth graders. And then also just want to highlight schools like Kelly Miller, where they're being creative. They've created a Apple-style Genius Bar to support students and families with tech challenges. And so again, lots of great work happening across Ward 7. We do look towards, ensuring that this is again, a strong experience to learn at home. And there are a couple of things I want to highlight. One is we have very predictable schedules, which is something that families have asked for. More live instruction time, which is also something that families ask for. And then our one-stop shop in our Canvas platform. We knew as a part of reopening that tech readiness was going to be key to a strong start. We've surveyed families over the summer to assess whether or not students would need devices or support with internet access. We've had a tremendous amount of responses, and as a result, have issued 21,000 devices and counting, and device distribution continues as families request. And then we're providing LTE-enabled devices or hotspots for those students that need support with internet access. And again, that distribution is ongoing. We have also launched a call support center with additional bandwidth. We saw on the first day a number of tech challenges, particularly around passwords and students' ability to log in. And so proud that we've been able to address many of those. However, the call center is up and running, will continue to be available to families that have any challenges. And we're directing all of our families to our backtoschool.dc.gov website where they can get common answers to questions. And then finally, I will close, just remind us all that, we're still wanting families to be in the enrollment process if they haven't. That is one of the criteria for receiving a device. And we know because of the virtual environment we're in, that may be a challenge for families. And so we're asking the community to be partners with us in the enrollment process, and then also reminding families that every day still counts, and we're still taking attendance, and DCPS is taking attendance through login and activity in Canvas. And we've seen thus far a strong showing on day one and a steady increase over the past 4 days in our first week. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to share some of those highlights, and I appreciate your support and partnership for the residents of Ward 7.
Thank you, Chancellor Ferebee. I want to make one quick adjustment. I tried my best to tell the truth, but we're also going to just roll with it. We do have our council chair here, and I neglected to recognize him at the beginning of our meeting. So Phil Mendelson is with us. I want to make sure that if there's any updates he wants to give, any questions that are directed towards him, people can have that opportunity. He does need to sign off a little before 7, and it's 6:42. So I want to actually shift things a little bit both to see if Mr. Mendelson has anything he'd like to share. And then, I'm sorry, Dr. Walker Davis.
Thank you, Ebony Rose. So now I'm probably in trouble with Michelle, but I'll try to make it up somehow. I just wanted to thank you for giving me just a moment. I want to note that the council comes back from recess next week, and we've scheduled some hearings and some markups. On September 15th, the Committee of the Whole is going to have a hearing on a resolution that was introduced since the council on starting a process for renaming Woodrow Wilson High School. And that hearing is following another hearing on other renamings. I don't think those involve any schools. We are planning on September 22nd to move forward with marking up the bill that would rename Antawan after Laurine Whitlock. We will be having a hearing on October 2nd. The notice hasn't been filed yet. I've been working or pressing the Education Committee a hearing on distance learning. Now the details of how that hearing will be structured, I don't know offhand, but this is my intent that that hearing will be broad enough that it can cover issues of access to digital and electronic equipment, looking at issues of attendance, looking at any other concerns with regard to distance learning. So that the hearing notice hasn't been filed, but that's supposed to be October 2nd. And I am pressing the Education Committee to agree to a joint hearing on Bill 23-515. I think we're looking at October 23rd. That bill was introduced at the request of the Board of Education. I believe it's called the Statewide Educational Data Warehouse Amendment Act of 2019. That hearing notice has not been filed, and that date is not firm, but we're looking at that. And then I'm also trying to get the Education Committee to agree to having a hearing, an oversight hearing on the transfer of the security contract from MPD to DCPS. Mr. Grasso hasn't agreed to that yet. If he doesn't agree, we'll go forward with the hearing, but I'm hopeful that it'll be a joint hearing in October. The council's meeting on September 22nd and again on October 6th. So just throw that out. Thank you for letting me do that, Ebony Rose.
No worries. Does anyone have questions for Councilmember Mendelson? See anybody in the chat?
Thanks again.
All right, thank you. All right, Dr. Walker Davis.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ebony Rose, and thank you to Nzinga Poole for the opportunity and invitation to be here tonight. It is a pleasure to be meeting you all virtually. Of course, I wish it could be in person, but thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm so excited to be returning back to DC. I'm not sure how many of you know that I spent the early parts of my career in DC. I was there from 2000 to 2007 and worked in the education arena, starting first in the CFO's office and the budget office working on education issues, spending most of my tenure working as the education advisor to Mayor Anthony Williams. And then right before I left, spent close to 2 years at DC Public Schools, working then for Clifford Janey. And right before I left for Michelle Rhee. And so this is just a wonderful opportunity to come back and to be in the District of Columbia working on issues that are close and dear to my heart. My passion is education. I want to also recognize Saba Burita, our vice chair of the DC Public Charter School Board, and to publicly thank her for the support that she gave and really, quite frankly, the process that the board put in place in crafting the profile for the next ED and the community engagement that was done for what the community wanted to see in this role. And I know that the Ward 7 Education Council played a part in that engagement process and advising and giving input on that. So I really appreciate that. Want to say a little bit about myself. I am originally from New York, went to public schools in New York City, and came to Washington, DC after being in graduate school and having an opportunity to do an internship here, and absolutely fell in love with the city and knew that I wanted to be not just involved in education policy work, but really wanted to do that here in the District of Columbia. And so I like to say that I cut my teeth professionally in the district, but much of what my experience was as a public school student in New York City and my early years in District of Columbia have really informed what I brought to the work in education, even in my last 12 years in the Minneapolis and St. Paul area. I want to say a little bit about, I believe there was a question around what my priorities might be. So first, acknowledge that I'm in week 4 of the role, and so I am still actively listening and learning, have had the opportunity to meet with many community stakeholders and learning from my staff and my team. And I know that Nicole and her team have a whole list of engagement left for me yet to do. But some themes have emerged very early in those conversations, and wanted to just share those briefly because they will inform my work over the next few months and early in this onboarding process. So both with my engagement with the charter board, through the hiring process and early conversations with staff and stakeholders, 3 things have emerged as really being important for the work that we do, not just in the charter sector, but across the landscape, and in particular, our role as an authorizer. One is accountability, really upholding the long track record that the board has had around accountability for public education, supporting schools in the balance between autonomy and accountability, and really being a part of that larger conversation about what our community sees and wants from all of our public schools and how charter schools fit into that landscape. Another theme that I heard was this notion of equity and what that really means across all of our schools, but in particular, what does that mean for many of our LEAs who serve unique populations, and how do all public schools really think about how we lift up and support our most vulnerable students in whatever environment they may be navigating. And then lastly, a collaboration. What does collaboration look like in the public education space between and across charter schools and DC public schools, within and amongst charter schools, and also with our community partners, both around individual schools, but the plethora of funding and programmatic and policy partners that we have in the DC, the DC landscape around education. So those were the 3 themes that really emerged in the process and that I would say I'm leaning into. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Chancellor Ferebee, and just thank him too for the warm welcome that he gave me earlier on in the process, and just to know that I have such an amazing partner in this work. I'm coming into an education landscape that has strong leadership in the traditional school system and strong leadership on our council and strong leadership in our community, much like the Ward 7 Education Council. So really excited to be coming back to the city and really entering the education arena again. And I know you may have some more specific questions for me, but that's what I'm bringing to this space right now.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. For people who joined a little bit later, I'm going to just reiterate, please drop questions or comments in the chat. That is how we're going to moderate this discussion, and we will work from top to bottom. So drop them in and we'll go from there. So I want to pause for a moment to give people to put their questions in. And thank you both for coming and being open to having a conversation with us. And also thank you, Councilmember Mendelson, for dropping those details into the chat. Thank you. All right, so I'm waiting for my first question because I can always ask my own questions, but it's not about me. Okay, so the first question is for Michelle. What is your view on how to increase budget transparency around charter
Sure.
schools?
I was remiss in all of my acknowledgments in not acknowledging the Ward 7 school leaders that are on our call and conversation today. So I just want to say a special acknowledgement to you, and also happy start of the school year. I know this is not the start of the school year that any of us imagined, but just really wanted to say hats off to our school leaders who have just done a phenomenal job in really setting up our children and families for success as best as we can in this virtual environment. In terms of my views on how to increase budget transparency around charter schools, I want to first acknowledge that there is a considerable amount of transparency within the charter community, some of which is set by law and some of which we as an authorizer and board have really been thinking about how to support. And we've made some shifts in our practice over time about how to do that better. We also have recently brought on some finance support so that we can be in better conversations with schools in helping them with what they need and in us getting the information that we need to be able to provide that reporting. So I do feel like we have some good mechanisms in place, and transparency is sort of front and center around the work that we do. And some of you may know that we have changed some of our practices, changed what gets published on our website. And so that is something that continues to be a focus of mine and of our board.
Okay, the next question is for Dr. Ferebee, and I'm gonna read it. I'm concerned about the safety of my little ones traveling to and from school, and the increased risk of exposure to COVID in class if we go back to in-person learning. Will families be able to choose to remain home and continue distance learning if the city returns to in-person instruction?
Thank you, Ebony, for that question. Also, just express my gratitude for the leadership of Chairman Mendelson and appreciate his context for the council leadership. And also, it's good to see you, Michelle, and glad to hear your remarks and have you in the city. I also recognize Principal Dabney. I saw he logged on at Kimball, welcoming him to his role there, and he's gotten off to a really solid start. But in terms of the question, there will always be an option for families to choose remote learning for the foreseeable future. We want to give choice as we're in this phase of, trying to work around and manage the pandemic. And that was one of the points of feedback that we received from families. So we anticipate our in-person experiences will be a hybrid approach and a all virtual model for those families that would like to remain remote. It is important to note that we are continuing to have conversations with WMATA around health and safety protocols and what can be done for students that are using public transit as their mode of transportation. And then we continue to work with IC on health and safety protocols for those students that are utilizing bus transportation through IC and our yellow buses. And so we will continue to build that out and ensure that we have as much safety measures in place as possible to ensure student safety to and from school.
Okay, I'm gonna assume this is for both. Did I mute myself? No, good. What changes, if any, are there going to be conducted? Are there going to be around how the enrollment audit is conducted next month?
Yeah, good question. That I don't know. I think that's more so a question for IC. We are collecting enrollment information. As you can imagine, as I referenced earlier, it's a little bit more challenging this year because the documentation for residency is a little bit more difficult for families to do online. We have created a structure for people to do that online, and we're also standing up some in-person opportunities for students and families to get the appropriate documentation in for registration and enrollment. But what that will look like between now and October is still fluid at this point from my view.
I would echo those sentiments. We do, Chancellor and myself and the Deputy Mayor have an opportunity to meet weekly with ourselves and the State Superintendent, and it's one of the things that we are constantly monitoring. And so I would lean on OSSI in terms of giving us additional guidance, but we suspect that it will look different than in past years. And we're paying attention to where those particular pain points are and seeing if there's any need to make any adjustment in, requirements or what we communicate to schools and families.
All right, I want to acknowledge that Eric is trying to ask a question for Ferebee, but hasn't finished the question. So if you finish it, I will ask it. Chanel has a question. She asked, Michelle, how are you all gathering information on issues of equity in charter schools?
Sure. So what I would say to that is there are multiple ways that broader issue of equity gets addressed in multiple mechanisms that we have in place. So if talking about equity in terms of services for different student populations, and in particular special student populations, there are unique processes around special ed compliance and English language learner services compliant. We have a performance management framework that captures the performance of multiple student groups and provides us an opportunity to do an analysis on how LEAs in schools are serving particular student groups. And so that would be another touch point around equity and student performance and student achievement. We also have opportunities in looking at school climate and school environment about how students are accessing the learning. So that's another area where we have an opportunity to look at the data and what those data say. I would also say that the broader conversation around equity is one where we anticipate engaging our school leaders and our broader community about what that needs to look like, how that needs to shift, and maybe how some of our policies and practices need to be adjusted to capture that. So I feel like there are mechanisms in place now, and I also know that we will and can make adjustments depending on how we engage the community in greater expectations around what that would mean.
All right, I'm going to ask a follow-up question about the audit. Oh, well, actually special ed audit. So this is from a teacher. Based on my experience in the past working with a charter school, I realized that the audit process did not always uncover certain issues, such as special education violations. How do you perceive strengthening the audit process so that students with special needs are supported in all charter schools as contemplated by law?
Sure. So again, I'm in week 4, so I may not have all of the answers to this, but I do know that we have an amazing audit team. We have an amazing school performance department, and our lead around special ed is particularly keen to this area and has already started communicating to me about the processes that we have in place and where there might be opportunities to tighten that. So I don't have specifics to tell you now about how we will do it, but I will say that this is an area that we are paying careful attention to, and quite frankly, in partnership with OSSI and the supports that they are providing and the guidance that they're giving in schools, we certainly will be paying attention to what improvements we need to make on our end as well.
And I just would add, sorry, totally unsolicited, that I just would add that OSSI has the actual enforcement power around the DA. So I think that's an important distinction between the two agencies.
All right, so our next question is, how will families and teachers be assured that DCPS facilities are in fact safe to return to in-person instruction in November? Just saying they are is not good enough.
Yeah, so we are very transparent, and you can find our health and safety principles on our website. We'll continue to be very transparent around how those principles are reflected in what students, staff, and families should expect from DCPS. For example, it speaks to protective equipment, and we speak to the fact that every day, every student and every staff member will be provided a disposable mask. We also speak to social distancing and how there'll be physical markings throughout the building to help guide students and staff with social distancing. We also speak to our transitions, ensuring that there's minimal transition in the morning and afternoons and throughout the day. And then we also speak to our measures for feeding, for meals for lunch. We speak to water fountains, and then we speak to front office plexiglass installments. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we are starting work on our HVAC systems that we'll also be able to share in greater detail. So as work is completed and as we continue to stand up those health and safety protocols, we'll be an open book and be very transparent about all the work that's being done and how they align to our 10 principles around health and safety.
It's probably actually worth asking that same question for the charter schools, because I know we tend to have both parents of both DCPS and teachers of both DCPS and charters.
You might need to repeat the question if I misheard it. Yeah,
I'm happy to. How will families and teachers be assured that, I'm just going to say facilities, are in fact safe to return to for in-person instruction in November?
Sure. So we have the support of health and safety consultants at the board who have been going out and supporting right now any school that is in any partial in-person stance. And there are a handful of our charter schools that most are all virtual, but any school that has any part of in-person instruction is getting support in following the health and safety guidelines that OSSI has put out and the health department has put out. And we would have the same expectation for those who are returning in November in terms of full in-person instruction, that they would be compliant with the health and safety guidance and that we would provide that extra support for them to monitor their plans. Outside of that, I don't have an answer as to how we might enforce that, but there are mechanisms in terms of compliance reporting and our monitoring that would ensure that those are safe environments. And I believe that each of our LEAs, much like the Chancellor mentioned, is providing the option that should families want to continue virtual, that would be an option allowed for them as well.
Thank you. The next question, how are you ensuring equitable resources and safety procedures across DC Charter, which you started to answer with the facilities, but are there other things that fall into that resources and safety procedures bucket?
I'm not sure that they are things that fall into that bucket, but what I would say, as you all know, each of our LEAs are independent LEAs, and so there are things that they will be doing sort of on their own, but our job is to ensure compliance to the guidelines and the requirements set out by the health department and within the limits of the law. We certainly want to encourage as much partnership as can be and economies of scale around doing some of these, and where we can provide support to provide that support. But outside of that, each school it's not going to look the same for every school and LEA, but there are some guidelines that are set out for schools that we would expect all of our LEAs to follow.
I don't know if you heard me say thank you. Probably not, because I was on mute, but thank you. Are you interested in creating a special education consortium in order for charter schools to leverage economies of scale in order to increase capacity of individual charter schools to serve the diverse needs of children who receive special education services? I'm going to pause because there's a second part to this for DCPS.
I just want to underscore again that ultimately the monitoring and enforcement on special ed is with OSSI. I do know that OSSI is currently revamping the resources that they have available for LEAs and also professional development that's provided. And so I don't know if that is one of the things that they are considering, but we continue to work in partnership with them to enhance all of the services and supports that are available to schools. So I can't answer yes or no about that, except to reiterate that OSSI ultimately has that control, and any way that we can support schools in navigating meeting those guidelines, we do.
Okay. DCPS. Parents are still struggling with distance learning tech, ? What is DCPS doing to address this?
So as I mentioned earlier, we continue to expand our call center supports and supports for schools to help families troubleshoot any technology challenges, and then also ensuring devices and hotspots and internet support is at the ready. And so as families express need, you know, some families have said, I had a device and now that device isn't functioning. They can request the device from DCPS and we'll respond accordingly. We're in the process of imaging our devices for pre-K3, pre-K4. It's important to note that they started today with their home visits, and then they'll continue that process throughout next week, and we'll start the device distribution for early childhood education. Device for early childhood education will be the iPad, because we believe that's the most developmentally appropriate for that age group. But if there are other technology concerns that are a little bit more specific, I'm happy to follow up accordingly.
Okay, I'm gonna keep working through the chat because I see 10 new messages. So bear with me, y'all. For DCPS, there are plans to change the way. No, I was right the first time. Dr. Ferebee, why do parents have to wait until the end of September to see their child's individualized distance learning? We are part of the team, but DCPS is not letting us on this team.
I'm not sure I'm following that question. Why do parents have to wait until late September for
the end of September? I'm assuming these are individualized distance learning plans.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, they could be, I'm not sure they're referring to addendums to individual education plans for students who receive special education services. But I'm not sure there.
Okay, I'm gonna wait for some more information to come in and we'll revisit. For DCPS, there are plans to change the way DCPS budgets for its schools in FY 2020, moving away from the comprehensive staffing model to a more student-based budgeting system. Chancellor Ferebee, can you speak to the motivations for this change and how DCPS will be sure to adequately fund its small schools, many of which are in Ward 7?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate that question because we continue to collect feedback. I want to be really clear that the motivation is not to change it from the comprehensive stats model structure that we're in to a student-based budgeting, but the goal is to try to create a system that is more equitable and transparent. The council, I don't know if Chairman Mendelson is still on, has expressed great frustration that you know, they can't track at-risk funding as some people in the public have. And one of the challenges, those types of funding streams are baked into the comprehensive staffing model. And then those dollars are allocated to school on all schools receiving the same. And so as you can imagine, equity is not synonymous with equality. And so while we're providing every school with the same resources in the same position, I don't know that that's the most equitable approach. And we have to acknowledge that we have schools that have various needs based on their student population. And the way we allocate our resources should reflect that. And right now, people who look at the DCPS budget only see what the comprehensive staffing model allocates and not our lens of equity. And I think we can do a better job with that. And it's my goal and my motivation is to give our community a transparent model where they can see how dollars are flowing to schools, and then also they can see the elements of equity that we've incorporated.
Chancellor Ferebee, do we have an estimated timeline for when people will see those changes?
Yeah, so the goal is for fiscal year 22 is to make a modification to our budget allocation model. And we've made some enhancements, we made some advancements. So we're much more transparent than we were when I first started, but there's still a long ways for us to go to be where I want us to be and for me to be satisfied. And so we'll have an engagement session scheduled, I believe it's going, not next week, but the following week, to re-engage people around the budget development process. So people should be out on the lookout for dates to be engaged again. I think the preliminary date for that is going to be Monday, September the 14th.
Thank you.
Ebony Rose, can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, I don't know who I heard.
Kubila. This is Kubila.
Karla.
Hi, Dr. Ferebee, thank you for speaking to that. One question I have is, as you all are deliberating what changes you make, are you all doing any sort of real-time analysis or modeling to see where, like, which model would have any sort of differing impacts on different schools, particularly in, you know, the wards where we know schools are struggling with enrollment, and how student-based budgeting could impact them negatively?
Yes, so, you know, a part of this is, one, ensuring that we can reflect all the budget streams. So we can reflect our local funding, our federal funding, such as Title I, and then our at-risk dollars. But yes, we are considering how schools would be impacted, and there's some modeling in place. However, there are special considerations that we have, as somebody mentioned earlier, small schools. We do have some schools that are at a smaller population due to their building footprint, some due to changes in their school community and their neighborhood. We also have schools that serve a wide range of grade levels. For example, we have some schools that serve pre-K to 8, and then we have some schools that serve 6 through 12. So we have a unique portfolio of schools that we need to consider, and the resources needed to deliver on a high quality education for every student. But we remain committed to a real dose of equity in that, and ensuring that schools get what they need to receive. And some schools do receive more dollars than others because of their unique circumstances. But that's often not transparent for the community to see. So the goal is to have a bright line around where there's a need to provide additional resources to school based on their special circumstances.
All right, so we'll look forward to getting more information on the budget and how, and any changes made.
Yes, budget is always high topic. And I think the thing we must recognize is we're likely going to be in a very unique financial landscape, given the impact of the pandemic on revenue. So I think more so than ever, this is a time to be more transparent and shine a light on equity.
Well, we will see. I have a comment that is next. Hard to believe anything on the DCPS website.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you for coming back. I mean,
no, I'm always going to read all the things.
Okay, go ahead.
And because I also know I read them out loud because I know we have people on the phone who can't see the chat. So hard to believe anything on the DCPS website when for the past decade, they are often more untrue than true about our lived experiences inside the buildings. How will we know the HVAC systems have been done, that cleaning has been done, and how will it be different than the past?
Yeah, you know, when I saw that from Laura, I was disappointed because I think we've got to have good intentions, assumptions of each other during this time period. And, you know, if we need to record somebody installing, you know, a new system in the HVAC system, we'll do that. But, you know, there's going to have to be some goodwill understanding of where we are in this time. And I just frankly been disappointed by some of the antics of people like Laura and the way that they responded. This is not how we get to a good place for children. And DCPS is going to be transparent about the work that we do for our students for health and safety. And we're going to trust that the community has trust in us. And if there's questions, we'll answer those questions. But I just think this is a time that we got to get to a point of assuming the best from one another. And, you know, I would expect different from Laura and those who have, you know, kind of been advertised on some of the work that DCPS has done.
So let me offer this as a bridge. my neighborhood school is Plummer Elementary. Most of y'all know, like I went to Plummer, pre-K through 5. I know Plummer has had a bunch of HVAC issues, and so maybe it's helpful just to share as a follow-up to the meeting if there are particular school communities we have concerns about, as a way to bridge the goodwill on both sides.
Yeah, it'll be appreciated. I mean, please know that DCPS is not out to intentionally deceive the community about health and safety. There'd be no advantage in us doing that. We want to keep our staff and students safe. And we're going to do everything possible to make that happen. But we can't get lost in the unintended consequences of distrust in what we say we're going to do and the actions that we're going to take. So that's just my soapbox on that, and I would hope that that's the posture that we assume going forward. And we know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we'll again do everything possible to keep our students and staff safe.
All right, so Eric qualified his questions. He is talking specifically about being able to see his students' individualized distance learning plan. Do we have individualized distance learning plans for students in DCPS? I'm
assuming that he was referring to those students that are receiving special education services, but I would need more context.
I would assume so too. So let's assume that. Is that helpful as an assumption?
Right. If that's the assumption, I guess the question is, why does it take so long? What's the time period? And I don't have those details, but I would assume that the IEP process is always a collaborative process, and there's appropriate planning that would need to occur in conversations with students and families to make any adjustments to an individualized education plan. And that's going to take some time. And that'd be my assumption there, without knowing the details on the situation.
Is there somebody who he could follow up with, or you would
advise
for him to follow up with?
Yeah, Carrie Larkin, and I think she's referenced in the chat box, would be the most appropriate person, but I'm happy to follow up after this discussion.
Awesome, thank you. This question is for Dr. Ferebee. Parents are still, did I ask this? Parents are still, I did ask this, but I guess it's just really important that parents are still struggling with distance learning tech, and any supports DCPS has to address this.
Yeah, the back to school page I referenced earlier, or just reaching out directly to their school if they need a device, or they're having problems with the internet, or they're having tech issues. We have a team that's at the ready to respond and troubleshoot accordingly. Maybe I should ask this. Are there common tech issues or supports that you're seeing? So the common issue we saw day one was passwords. So similar to your bank account, if there's too many attempts and you have the incorrect password, you're locked out. And that's there for safety precautions. And we found that a lot of students hadn't logged in since the spring or forgot their password. And so the majority was troubleshooting passwords. And then most recently, we heard that there was an update that needed to be done on some devices. So if a student hadn't used their device in months, they may not have had the latest software update for Microsoft Teams. And so the camera may not have been functioning properly. And that's been resolved for anyone who had an older device. But those are the top two that I am hearing. And, Canvas, for the most part, I continue to hear positive feedback on our course companions. And we have made several enhancements to Microsoft Teams, one on the safety side, but also the ability for students and staff to appropriately communicate. Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick housekeeping. It's 7:21, according to my computer. And we actually have some more people who are gonna chime in with us. We probably have more, I don't know, it just tells me messages. So I see 10 messages in the chat. I'm gonna ask two things. One,
I'm gonna cut off the queue with what I have. Two, I'm gonna ask that both of the esteemed doctors, when you respond, be as concise as possible. And then I'm gonna.
You might have to cut me off, but yes, let me know if
I
I'm
don't
going
want to
too
have
far.
to do that because it's not a great feeling when somebody does that to me. And so, like, you know, golden rule. So hence my warning. This is a general question for both. How will school and campus level attendance be used to analyze where supports are needed and mobilize to engage students and families who are not able to engage in distance learning?
So I'll try to be concise. So I think we have to first start with the realization that attendance is going to be different than if we were in a physical environment, and that myself, Chancellor Ferebee, the deputy mayor, the state superintendent are all keyed in on we are actively engaged in learning, and attendance does matter. And so there was some guidance set out by the state superintendent about how attendance is going to be looked at for our particular LEAs. Each of those LEAs determined what justified an appropriate amount of exposure and distance learning to meet that attendance, all of that under the guidance of the required daily instruction. And so I believe that we're going to have an opportunity to gather some information from that. I know in our initial conversations and reviews of plans, LEAs are pretty keyed in on which students aren't showing up for distance learning and what that might mean and what the appropriate steps will be. That was a specific question in the continuous learning plans. What will be your specific actions when you see red flags, if you will, around attendance? And so I do think we'll have some data available to us to capture just from the numbers. But then I would also say that it's important to hear the stories and learn firsthand from what the LEAs and school leaders are experiencing for their families. And we certainly want to be in dialogue with them about what they're learning and what that might mean for both how we return physically, but what we do in the immediate for children and families who might not be engaged. So that's what I'll say for now.
Yeah, with great brevity, along the same lines, we actually started our strategy around outreach around devices before school even start. And so we have a tracking document where we can keep account of who has received a device, who said they didn't need a device. And that is our first means of collecting data on which families we need to make contact with. And we now have attendance data that we can couple that information with. And we're asking teams at school level and even centrally to reach out to families who we haven't heard from or who are not regularly engaged.
This question is about outdoor learning. What is the status of plans for any kind of outdoor learning at DCPS and charter schools? Are there any plans for guidelines in the fall? And what could it look like and how to staff it?
Yeah, so we've provided a guidance document for our principals that are interested in creating in-person experiences. And they can do that through staff volunteering to provide those services. We have given them a time frame in which they can start to stand up those activities. We wanted to first focus on a successful start for remote learning. But beginning this month in September, schools can start to plan for in-person experiences to be approved. And a part of that in-person experience can be outdoor learning.
This question is specifically for Dr. Walker Davis. How do you plan to encourage healthy teacher retention rates in the charter sector? What types of teacher input does the PCSB receive, and how could that be strengthened institutionally? Example, through a teacher advisory committee question. How can we protect teachers in the charter sector? Wait, let's stop there, and then I'll ask the second part. So I'm gonna repeat that. Do you need me to repeat the first part?
No, I think I saw it in the chat, and but do let me know if I didn't address it. So first, we don't have a teacher advisory board, but the deputy mayor did put out a sample survey to gather teacher input for returning to to online learning or distance learning. And it's my understanding that a number of our LEAs used that to gather teacher input, and that informed their reopening plans. And so that's one way that that was gathered. Of course, we value teacher input and we encourage LEAs to do that. That is the primary source of gathering that input. It is at the LEA site. We do, of course, have public comment, and in fact, where we directly hear as a board from teachers is usually through that vehicle. That's probably not the best vehicle, but it is the one way that we know for sure that there is direct communication with our board. And we certainly value teacher input and have partnered with bringing teachers to the charter sector, et cetera. And so we're certainly open to think about ways that we could do that better, but the avenue right now is primarily with the LEA and through our public comment.
Okay, so there's a second part, and I want to note that the question was specifically about teacher retention.
Sure.
How can we protect teachers in the charter sector, this is the second part, that have information to share about their schools that could impact student safety or equity, but fear retaliation?
Sure. So I would say where we do hear those issues rise is primarily, again, through the public comment. I would have to go back, honestly, with my team and find out what are some of the other mechanisms that we currently have in place before speaking about others. But in terms of teacher retention, we do have, we do look at sort of school climate and school engagement in our audit process. And I think that's one of the first places where we start to gather information about what that looks like. That is not limited to teachers, though. That's in general about the school climate. And so I'd have to go back and reflect a little bit more about what information we currently gather on teacher retention right now before I can answer that any better. You're on mute.
Clearly. Any measures around protecting teachers from retaliation that can be noted?
Sure. I mean, from a board's perspective, there is a community complaint process, and that does not involve any retaliation. I can't speak to what may occur at the specific LEA sites, but we certainly don't encourage that, and we encourage teachers to be able to bring forward as much as they can at public comment, and that we would direct it to where it would be appropriately addressed. That is not always the board is not the appropriate place for those things to be addressed.
Okay. Thanks everyone for all the questions. As I noted, because I know we had a couple people join at 7:21 and they're time stamped. I stopped the questions for this period because I want to get through, I want to honor what was in the queue. And we've had a lot of good questions. If there are other questions that are for these two guests after that 7:21 time, because that's when I made that announcement, feel free to type them in the chat and we will share them. Okay, to the school leaders on the call, how are you all engaging students and continuing expanding your school culture and SEL efforts during distance learning efforts? Asking as it may be a good chance for shared ideas.
I think the question was about engaging students, correct?
Yeah, the question was for school leaders. Okay. So I know we have a couple school leaders on the call, which will give you all a chance to take a breath. How are you engaging students, continuing to expand your culture and SEL efforts? And they're saying they want to know because it might be a great chance to just share some ideas. I don't know if anybody wants to venture in.
Sure. Good evening, folks. This is Kareem Ewing Boyd. I'm the campus director at the East End campus for the Elsie Whitlow Stokes Community Freedom Public Charter School. We've been, our general practice is the first 6 weeks of school is mostly focused on community building, and that's been even more a focus in our Summer Professional Development Institute leading into the school year this year. There's a big focus on PD around trauma-informed teaching, about restorative justice practices and the responsive classroom model, and the peace of mind curriculum. And on top of that, our staff at both our Ward 7 campus and our Ward 5 campus have been spending a lot of time making sure that We are supporting families' physical needs, partnering with the Ward 7 COVID response team to do meal deliveries, and with Martha's Table to do grocery distribution, along with the food distribution that is made possible through the USDA. So just really focusing on trying to make sure that the communities around the kids are as supported as we can make them, both our our in-school community and the communities in the throughout the city.
Thank you, Kareem. I'm sorry you all's parade got rained out. And I really appreciate you all hanging in there with us since March on the meal delivery. That's awesome.
I mean, we were really, the teachers were super excited about trying to do the parades, but we couldn't take the risk.
So I raised that because to the person who asked the question. So one of the things they were trying to do is a welcome back parade for their students. And they invited community members. So I know people are trying to do virtual and social distance community connection efforts as well. And it's something they do every year.
If I could I jump in on this one too?
Come on, Dr. Curtis.
I appreciate you. So peace, everybody. I'm Dr. Curtis. I'm at Ron Brown High School, and Dwayne Cozy is my brother for sure. I wanted to share in the spirit of collaboration that some of what we do at Ron Brown in the way of really maximizing the social and emotional connectedness is keeping a lot of the norms that we had in person in this virtual space and doing our best to work with the tech to make it happen. So our new Principal Hunt, he's allowed us to put in some of these things into the schedule. So our community circles that started every day still start every day. Our community circles go every day for every grade level, and we found ways to plug them into the circle and not disrupt any of the synchronous instructional time. That was one of the key things, like it took probably hours to make happen. Kareem, that's why I asked about how y'all do your schedule and stuff, because it isn't easy, but Principal Hunt was also really clear, like it had to happen. Some of the team from the care team at our building, we also are still in restorative circles as well. We have brothers that, made some bad decisions the first couple of days, as we could all imagine. We've been in classrooms already. We had teachers add us to their teams so we can see some of what's happening as it's happening. I say teams. DCPS is using Microsoft Teams, if that didn't make sense. But we're able to see some of what's going on in the classrooms. And quite frankly, we also have like the pull-up ministry. Mr. Cozy himself, we had some of the brothers who graduated last year. They didn't have a way to school. We got pictures of them in Norfolk State, and Mr. Cozy took them to college, right? Like moved them in himself. We also have brothers that we can't get on the phone in class. Like we're on the line doing it. We really are leveraging, I think, every bit of technology as well as like our own gifts and skill to figure out how to make these brothers feel loved and connected, because it's ugly outside. I think as Chancellor Ferebee said, there's no end in sight. Like no one knows when it's really going to stop. So we got to do everything we can do, including leveraging tech, as well as keeping some of the things that they came to like about school in place. So hopefully we can all collaborate on how to do that. That genius bar that Chancellor Ferebee mentioned, I want to hear more about that, because that sounds dope. Like the idea of having young people working with young people to get some of the tech stuff worked out. Like that's amazing. So anyway, like definitely we appreciate that question for the spirit of collaboration for sure, because we're going to need it.
Okay, so y'all see why I'm pushing through this so we can invite some of our panelists in because they have things to offer. That includes Dr. Curtis. This question is for Dr. Ferebee. How are teachers being considered in the planning process for reopening? A number of DCPS teachers live in Maryland and Virginia, and those jurisdictions may continue distance learning while DCPS goes back to in-person/hybrid. What kinds of considerations and supports will be offered to those DCPS teachers? I'm concerned about teachers being respected and cared for in process, since we are all in this together, students, families, and teachers alike.
Yeah, it's so important and a great point. We are in this together, and our teachers and all of our employees, their support staff and buildings, childcare is a critical consideration, and we are exploring options across DC agencies where we could potentially provide childcare for DCPS employees. It's important to note that district government was able to stand up childcare for employees in the spring, and we are looking at a number of opportunities that we could potentially stand up this fall as we plan for a hybrid experience for students. And we continue to have weekly conversations with the Washington Teacher Union about all the considerations for teachers and their membership. And pleased that we recently reached an agreement on protocols for learning at home and look forward to reaching an agreement on structures for hybrid learning.
Awesome. Kudos for reaching an agreement. Comments. The CSM, sorry, comprehensive school staffing model. So that's part of transparency. The comprehensive school staffing model is not transparent because DCPS is not transparent with it. It could be transparent if you wanted it to be without resulting in schools being closed. I'm gonna leave that as a comment because if it was a real meeting, I would have called on the person. I'm gonna ask you not to respond so you can respond to more questions if that's okay. Cool. Okay. Oh, this is a lot. Oh, okay. This is the response to Cozy, but Kareem has already shared a bunch of things around connecting with families. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. I see the think you all are having a great conversation in the chat around scheduling. Dr. Davis, welcome back to DC. Dr. Ferebee and Dr. Davis, thank you for taking the time to speak tonight. Oh, see, this is not a question, but thank you also for appreciating my facilitation. I support that. Laura makes a comment. She says, my life is on the line. I won't just rely on someone's word when I've been lied to over and over again in the past, period. Okay, that's where we are. For the record, to the comment earlier, Alex makes a note, and she's a parent. Experience shouldn't equal offense. There are long histories here, sir. So please accept everyone from where they're coming from because it is real to those experiencing concern and issues. Love and loyalty keeps DCPS teachers and parents here. Eric to everyone. Carrie Larkin stated that information on the navigating the IUP, so it is about IUP, DCPS workshop on September 1. She also said the system needed time. Our child was told to wait. Why? We're going to have to follow up with Eric after this about his IUP issues, because I think you noted that Carrie was the person to follow up with Dr. Ferebee. Okay.
That is correct. And Sharona Robinson on the DCPS team is also on the line and provided her contact information.
Okay, that would be awesome. Thank you. But no, so we're getting close because we're at 7:18. Benola asks, regarding the individualized distance learning plan, DCPS has provided a schedule of teachers. Let me read this before I speak. Okay, this is more information for Eric. We will get it to Eric. This is a follow-up to Allison's question. Yes, sorry, y'all. Follow-up to Allison's question about outdoor learning, including for charter schools. New York City has announced system-wide outdoor learning. Assuming this is an option we can employ when we return to school, including again in the spring when warm weather returns. Is there planning happening now to audit who has access to safe outdoor space and which schools need partnership with DPR, roads closed, et cetera, to get them access as is being done elsewhere?
Yeah, so we are not in a posture where we're mandating schools to implement outdoor learning. We have taken the position that if schools have interest, we will support them. They just need to submit their plans and ideas to do so. And DCPS will follow up accordingly. And as I mentioned earlier, we're giving schools guidance on how to do that. But in this time period, they have to have the staffing to do it. And they have to have staff that is willing to volunteer. And I know several schools have expressed interest in that.
Okay.
I would just echo that statement in terms of also including charters, that there are guidelines for how you would follow in-person learning. And again, that will be a decision that each individual LEA will make depending on their facility and their capacity and their ability to meet the guidelines.
All right, so I'm skipping down to more questions. Is the Public Charter School Board creating resources or supports for families having tech and internet issues? That's important.
So, yeah, so the resource that exists right now, should we get a complaint or should we get a concern from a family, it does go through our complaint process. We try to connect them to, of course, the school where they're having the issue. And then I know Nicole and other folks are connecting to where those resources exist in the community. We currently don't have resources within the board to provide tech, but should we hear about those resources being available, we're making that information available to our LEAs. And should we hear from those who want to provide resources, we're connecting them accordingly.
Okay, this is a comment that I'm going to turn into a question. Families picked up DCPS devices that didn't have camera drivers or Teams app installed, and both of those are needed for live instruction. Turning that into a question, if families are running into issues like that on the DCPS side, who do they follow up with about it?
Directly at the school, we did have one school that I'm aware of that may have distributed devices that were older that did not have the appropriate updates. That issue has been resolved. So the laptops have been updated so Microsoft Teams functions appropriately. But there were a few devices that were older in our inventory that may have not had the latest version of Microsoft Teams updated on their computer.
All
Again,
right.
that's been resolved.
So this is the beauty of doing these meetings from home. Someone's at my door, so I need to answer that. But that's perfect timing because we have gotten through all the questions that are down to 7:21, because that's when I said I was cutting off the queue. We will provide the rest of the questions and the comments to the guests. We're going to take a moment to switch over and invite our panelists in and for me to open my door. And Zinga, because you were the person who does the great work of inviting everyone, could you just introduce who our panelists will be? I want to thank Dr. Ferebee and Dr. Walker-Davis for what they shared today. And also just make a note that you're invited to stay with us. We're not kicking you off. We just want to be mindful of people's time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the grace.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yes, and thank you for putting me on the spot. It's my favorite place to be. I'd like to thank again Dr. Ferebee and Dr. Walker-Davis and invite our next section of panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to jump right back into questions. We have Dr. Charles Curtis, who you have heard a bit from, who's the Ron Brown High School psychologist and restorative justice coordinator, followed by, and this is the order of introductions, followed by Antawan Holmes, who's a Ward 7 parent, Houston DC Digital Equity and DC Education Advocate, and ANC 7C chair. We have Laurine Kennedy from a Plummer Elementary School teacher and WTU Exec, Washington Teachers Union Executive Board member. And last but not least, Karla Reid-Witt, who's a Ward 7 parent and Decoding Dyslexia DC co-founder. So Dr. Curtis, please introduce yourself.
I was about to say I'm Charles Curtis, but I'm really Teddy Riley with the mute. But anyway, so peace everybody. I'm Charles Curtis. I'm a psychologist at Ron Brown College Preparatory High School. I came to DCPS in 2016 when Ron Brown opened. I've been a practicing clinical and school psychologist for the past 15 years. I love what I do. I love the young kings that I serve. I will not be at any other school until I retire, but Ron Brown, I will leave that place when I stop working. And that said, I really get with the intentionality of meetings like this. It is extraordinarily important for us to collaborate and connect and figure out how to best serve people. I live in Ward 7. I am working in Ward 7. I am thankful to be on this call, thankful to be connected with you all, And I hope we can continue to get some good collaboration because it's needed. It's ugly outside. Y'all don't need me to tell you that. But I'm hoping we can like really be intentional about creating love and making love in the spaces that we are in. So thank y'all.
Awesome. Commissioner Holmes?
All right, thank you. So yeah, I'm Antawan Holmes. I'm the chair of ANC 7C. I'm also the commissioner of single member district 7CL7. That includes Houston Elementary School, which is the first dual language elementary school east of the river, and Ron Brown High School, live right across the street. So come check you out later, Ms. Curtis. And so, you know, being with community, we spent a lot of time making sure that education was one of our top priorities. And, you know, I'm also a parent of a second grader over at Houston, as well as a member of the Digital Equity in DC. So I've collaborated with a lot of parents. I see some of them on the line. I see Grace, Alexandra, Allison, and many others. We've been pushing for one-to-one student to PC ratio throughout DCPS to start to address the homework gap. And as DCPS, because of those efforts, DCPS is moving forward as a phased approach to address the one-to-one over 3 years. The next phase of this for digital equity for DC is to start talking about broadband and moving it from a luxury to a utility by hopefully getting the implementation of a municipal Wi-Fi throughout the district starting in Ward 7, since we have the highest digital divide numbers in the district. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we'll have Ms. Kennedy from Plummer.
Hi, good evening. I am Laurine Kennedy, yes, from Plummer. I have been with DCPS for 12 years. The last 8 have been at Plummer. I also am one who lives, works, and recreates a lot in Ward 7. So I am very passionate about what happens in Ward 7. I am a special education teacher, so that is a primary focus for me, to make sure the needs of all students get met. I definitely am passionate about, concerned about the equity that goes along, so definitely across Ward 7 and 8 as a whole, but then also how are we really meeting the needs of our special education students? I think a lot of the money goes to a lot of the issues that the general population has, and still our babies are even less further and further behind. So that is definitely one of my issues. Also, being a fan of family engagement, I saw somebody put something of that in the chat. Really good connecting with families and authentically listening to them to find out needs, because I think one of the issues, or I believe, not just think about, one of the issues is that I know we want to have a general curriculum that all students learn, but some of the issues like the technology divide really need to be addressed in order for our students to succeed. Our students are smart, our students are very capable, but if we don't have the tools to meet the needs, our kids will continually be behind. So those are the things that I'm just really passionate about, definitely coming to try and be solutions oriented and not just complain, but it's time to really address those issues. Last thing I will say, because I think on that also, we have the divide. We think about equity and we think about, even the fairness in terms of color. I think it's fair that we look at how we treat people with disabilities. Because I know even the thought process behind students are sometimes ill-equipped to deal with my kids. They might laugh at something or say something funny because they really don't understand. And so the understanding and the community greater understanding of people with disabilities and even their capabilities is something that needs to really be addressed as well.
Thank you so much. And finally, Karla.
I think the legal 15.
Uh-oh, I think, Karla, I think we're having some challenges with your audio. Can you start? It looks like you froze, but it looks like you're back. Can you start again, please?
I've spent about, is it working? Okay.
Yes, now it is.
My educational background is for about years. I've legal advocate for systemic change in DC education, mostly in support of parents and children. He is about 3 years old of advocacy, working with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, and serving as a facilitator as instructor. About a year and a half ago, I, along with 3 other colleagues, founded Decoding Dyslexia. Decoding Dyslexia access to education for students and other reading disabilities. Right now, our primary work is on a bill called Access to Reading. Okay.
Okay, so Ebony, I'm gonna let you pick back up with the chat, and we're gonna encourage folks. I know time is moving quickly to feed any of questions for any of our guests for the second panel, and Karla's gonna check on something for her audio to try and get a better feed. And I'm going back on mute.
Thanks, Nzinga. I appreciate you letting me put you on the spot. I will say that it's beautiful that all of our panelists are here in Ward 7. Antoine noted our internet issues, and then there is a storm. So, you know, good luck. But thank you all, and bear with us. I want to just note that we invited these panelists because we've seen a lot of questions around issues around digital divide, around the SPED population, and around connecting. So please, raise those issues in the chat. We want to continue to make it a conversation. I'm filling time to watch the questions come in, but that's why these people are here. First question, what additional supports do students, parents, and teachers need to be successful this fall? And that actually can go to all of the panelists.
I would offer the students, especially like in terms of additional, who knows where to start, right? Like there's definitely technology needs that students need. I think there's additionally, like we need grace. So that's maybe existential and conceptual, but above all, I think students need a whole lot of grace. They're navigating something that's just foreign to them. And to be quite frank, if they were DCPS in March, probably didn't feel so good for them. I think we can all kind of universally say like March to June was tough on everybody. It was just tough around the board. So that said, I think it was super important that we be intentional about giving grace, but like systemic grace. So it's something to be said about grace in our grading policies, grace in our feedback as adults. One of the things that we've talked a lot about at Ron Brown is we can't hold returning work. Like students got to see their work ASAP. They're not hand to hand. They don't see your face. They don't know if you're disappointed or pleased. They really need to see it come back virtually so they can get with it and get it back to you. But also, like, we need content that is not jarring or difficult. My first year in DCPS, quick story, every single 9th grade book that the young men had to read had a really, really problematic Black main character. Every single book that was on their reading list. Things like that right now just can't happen. Like it is too provocative, it's too jarring. Like we gotta be intentional about making sure that the social and emotional health is intact. Tomorrow, for example, when we go to school, anybody who doesn't address this shooting is losing. Good chance that the young men have seen the video, good chance that they've seen pictures of a weapon or not a weapon, or who knows what it was. Good chance they've seen all the Monday morning quarterbacking of what shoulda, coulda happened. But to not talk about it is essentially leaving them naked. So I think we have to have intentionality around grace for what they're dealing with, grace for what we do for them. And I've only talked about the students, and the teachers need just as much grace. You're trying to parent, teach kids. So anyway, like the students I can focus on like really succinctly, I think, but there's a whole lot of grace that's needed right now, but systemic, not just in name.
I see a double click on Grace and a hashtag Grace in the chat. We do tweet. So I don't know if that went out as a tweet and if that will become the hashtag for the night. Do any of the other panelists want to jump in on what other supports students need?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay.
Karla.
I just wanted to talk about the special education students, and I do want to go back to the individualized distance learning plan, because the plan for that from DCPS are for parents to be notified about next week about this, and it appears the school system wants pretty much most of the first month of school to address this. And I think that is what the concern is, because from the parent perspective, that's a month lost. And so the only thing I can say about that is just to the parents to just be on them. That's all you can do right now. If you don't receive it, call.
Thank you, Karla. And we can hear you super clearly, just so you know. All right, I'm gonna go to the next question. What are some of the creative approaches you've utilized to engage your most disconnected families? What have been some barriers to connecting, and what have been some successes? Sorry.
And this is Laurine Kennedy jumping in. I think some of the successes is really just building relationships with families. Even during the pandemic, having the opportunity to talk with them, you know, and it's not to say pushing education aside, but really because it was such a crazy time for everybody, really just spending the time and checking out, how are you doing? What's going on? Do you need anything? How do we help? And I think that was the beginning of, okay, we can reach out, we can trust this person, or we can trust this school. And then, you know, going forward from that, being able to just move forward and say, okay, now we need to infuse education, because I have had a family who was very distant. Some of the excess is if you have a child or several children, excuse me, in a school and different teachers are calling, or several children in different schools and teachers are calling, it became excess. And so it became difficult for me to reach one of my families, because she was like overwhelmed. You know, I'm trying to live and survive, and there's a whole lot going on with COVID that we don't know. And then everybody is calling me saying this, and this. I'm just trying to survive. And that's what she told me. I'm just trying to live. And I had to respect that. But then, okay, now is the time we still have to work on. So how can we, so listening to her, figure out how to help her child. Because we put all these prescriptions, call, do this, get online, and it's a little bit of a challenge. So the brother who said grace, that is definitely something, you know, that we have to consider in the time.
Thank you. One of the ways that we've been able to connect with families is we've made ourselves accessible via the internet as well. So we do our Wednesday DCPS high schools at least are not engaged in synchronous instruction. So it's like an off day in terms of being off schedule, not like off of work, but it's certainly off schedule day. So we do our circle on Instagram that day. We don't even go to Teams. We don't ask them to go to Teams, but we make ourselves like wide and public there. And so we have like intentionality about, like we had alumni moms who were on the call this past yesterday. So really trying to be as accessible as possible to families is one of the biggest things that we've been able to do. The going in person is our norm, but that's tough, quite frankly, in 2020. You can't just go see people. Not because, and it's not even about bravery. Like some of it, I don't want to put you in harm's way by pulling up to your house, and I've been to 5 houses before. Who knows what I'm taking to you? So that finding families has been tough, but we've been able to like make ourselves really, really accessible to families, especially on the front end. So with incoming students, with transfer students, with our 9th grade, we've been able to do that. And we did our entrance ceremony. It's our embellico ceremony. It's how we welcome new kings into the building. We did that virtually this year with a pre-record. similar to what like graduation felt like. If any of you all tuned into graduation, we were able to do a pre-record and did that as our welcome, but that was public. It was on Instagram, it was in Teams, it was all over the place, and really just try to make ourselves touchable.
All right. I will just note, you all did have a marvelous virtual graduation. I saw that R&B, those R&B moves your mascot had. So shout out to y'all for making it fun. That was awesome. If you did not see Ron Brown's graduation, I don't know if there's a way you can access it, but you missed something special.
We can figure it out, don't you worry.
So congrats on y'all's first class, the first class of Young Kings. I saw that the next thing was a comment in the chat. Laura commented, systemic grace should probably also be around impact on teachers. We need to show grace to our students, and the system needs to show grace to us. We're doing, has that official, and I'm sorry if because my days and everything is running together with COVID. Impact is happening this year. Yes? Nobody, okay, yes. And there aren't any modifications, correct?
Yeah, there's modifications this
Chancellor?
year for the learning at home posture, especially because we don't have testing data. So park is not included in the consideration, and those weights are shifted to other areas. And then we're continuing our comprehensive review of impact with our partners at American University and a team of individuals that have volunteered to give us guidance on how we can make improvements and enhancements to impact.
Okay, I also want to read, Dr. Ferebee, what you added in the chat. In terms of reading materials and curriculum documents, DCPS completed an audit of our materials from an anti-racist and anti-bias view. So those things have been updated since Ron Brown's first year.
Yeah, so I mean, Mr. Curtis makes a great point, and we heard this from our students, and they've been more vocal than ever that they want to see themselves reflected in their reading materials. They want a true sense of history and culture. And we have some work to do, and we're not done, it's ongoing. But I wanted the team to know that we hired a team of fellows to do an audit this summer, and we made some changes, and we established some protocols for teacher planning with anti-bias and anti-racist in mind. And we also have some training. And you know, our presenter reminded us that schools are either racist or anti-racist, and we have to ask our question, which one are we, and what structures are we creating accordingly? So just know that DCPS is engaged in that work. Have we got it all right? Absolutely not. There's still a lot more that we need to do, but it is top of mind for us.
Okay, sounds like you all have been hanging out with Dr. Kendi, which is awesome. I want to lift this up out of the chat. Thank you to all the teachers. If you haven't heard it, because parents are also underwater, we so appreciate you and all your efforts. That last part, we so appreciate you and all your efforts, is in capitals. A comment back about the digital divide, and Antawan, I don't know if you want to jump in. Grace has shared some of the digital divide stats in the chat, but she also just lifts up that digital divide statistics are highly correlated with income and education level in DC. So lowest connected wards are Ward 7 and 8. Perhaps Antawan can offer some more context on Ward 7. So I'm cold calling you a little bit, Antawan.
No, it's good. I'm here for the technical questions. So what we've seen over time, I mean, we've been advocating for digital equity for a long time. I mean, Octo was working on DC CAN as of 2011 when they had put fiber throughout the whole city. When I moved into the city, they still had, Verizon was still offering DSL while the other part of town, other sides of town was getting broadband. So you can bring it down to investment. What type of investment has been occurring in 7 and 8 in the slow rollout of technologies, even to this, the last conversation prior to the pandemic was to use 5G as a way to be able to get broadband speeds up in 7 and 8. But that basically says we have to we're giving access to our poles to AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, so that we could plug Wi-Fi into the neighborhood for connectivity. So what I always say is that I've seen the budgets for this city go up 13, 14, 15, 16 billion dollars. We need to start advocating for broadband as a utility. It's something that we use for everything around here, from applying for jobs, for research, shopping, etc. It's something that we just need as 7 and 8 to go down there to the Wilson building and say, you need to put money where your mouth is for equity and put broadband here so that we won't have these connectivity issues in our ward, and not always wait for corporate America to try to address the process. There's other cities who have been able to do municipal Wi-Fi for the better of the whole for their cities, and DC can do the same.
Awesome. I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask if I know there's a couple cities, but I'm glad you gave a plug that it's possible. Yeah. Going back to the chat, and I am lifting up comments as well. Sharona said, if you do want to catch some of the graduations, they are on DCPS's YouTube page. Kareem shared, staff are parents, staff have elders they are caring for, staff are in the hospital, staff have died. We must be caring for staff as people. So we're going to double click on that grace and a reminder that we have humans. Staff have lost parents of students. They are responsible to educate in a virtual platform. Kareem, question, is OSSI making changes to DC standards of teaching and learning for social studies? Laura chimed in. Laura's actually on the working group for that. I'm going to read what she responded, unless she wants to respond, because the people on the phone can't see the chat.
So the DC State Board of Education, under Ward 6 Representative Jessica Sutter, has constituted, I think they're calling it like an advisory committee, and it's like a 2-year plan. Basically, the committee would put out some guiding principles, which we just met for the first time last month. So part of that plan is for engagement. And we just started talking about what that might look like. And I will, of course, make sure a lot of my engagement is focused right here. Frankly, here in the WTU are kind of my 2 avenues. And basically, the guiding principles go to OSSI. OSSI is, in fact, in charge of rewriting the standards. OSSI brings those back to this group, I think, for feedback, hopefully. Ultimately, the State Board of Education then votes on anything that OSSI produces and approves it. But the actual writing would happen via OSSI. And I put a link to kind of more information. And I think they are trying to be pretty transparent about it all, but I'm sure it could always be better. But also, if you have any questions or comments or things you want to make sure get into that group, it can either go through me or you can go directly, I think, to Jessica and other people in the group as well.
Thank you, Laura. Khadijah commented, to Abdul's point regarding staff, what are some of the ways that schools are dealing with preventing staff burnout? And how are they addressing the unique challenges that COVID places on school staff?
At Stokes, we are lucky in that our director of operations very regularly goes for the jugular on any deal she's making. And so we have access to lots of mental health and behavioral health supports through our health insurance that we are making widely available for all of our staff. Also, our administrative teams are making individual phone calls to our staff on a rolling 2-week basis to make sure that we are talking with every single person, from our executive director to our kitchen staff and maintenance staff. Everybody is getting a call from somebody on our leadership team just to see how they are doing as an individual person.
May I ask, since we have school staff on the call, are there things that you all would recommend or would like to see to protect staff members from burnout? Dr. Curtis, you look like you're cooking up something, like you have some thoughts around this.
Yeah, I think the protection from burnout would certainly part and parcel of being attentive to what's happening, with that particular staff member. And that can get really tough, but hopefully there is some purview given to school leaders to navigate that. Personally, I have 2 young people in my house. I have a partner, a wife who works herself. Like there is no babysitter, there is no nanny, there is no daycare or anyone leaving the building. So that said, like having some intentionality around time in the building, like whenever returns occur, having some intentionality about expectations of accessibility, when things are submitted, when they aren't. Those things I think are really just low-hanging fruit that can really help prevent burnout. And quite frankly, some intentionality around days off, purposefully structured work week that helps the adults who have to be or who chose to be present to work with the young people. Something really acknowledging all the things that Kareem mentioned. Everybody's a person. Everybody is navigating like really hard times. But without a systemic answer to that, burnout is going to happen. And so on the last piece, I think really having adults who can be purposed in the building to go support, right? Like, so if you don't have the energy today, we need room to say, I don't have it today, and I need some help in this space, like without fear of retribution or like negative evaluation for me coming in today and just being fried.
Thank you for offering that. I saw Laura dropped in the chat her thoughts on protecting from burnout. We have to be realistic about our expectations. District learning is harder than in-person instruction, and hybrid learning will be extremely difficult because we will do it in person with intense protocols. Virtual and virtual only, it's a lot in capital letters. I'm gonna go back to I have one question. I think that was sent just to me, but I'm still gonna ask it because it was next in the queue. I can't help but ask, and this is actually for Dr. Ferebee, I think he's still with us, how DCPS plans to increase funding to schools in Ward 7 and 8, schools that are under-resourced and where children still do not have technology and other resources needed. Is it possible for them to create a pool of funds from schools that are not impacted by poverty? It says such as Horace Mann, who have an abundance of resources, even if it's from parent associations, and then disperse those funds to schools who lack funds and resources, especially in 7 and 8.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the plan is to ensure that our budget allocation model responds to the demands and needs of our community. But I will preview, as I mentioned earlier, that we could be in a much leaner and different financial landscape, depending upon what the city's revenue is. And DCPS has experienced the benefit of increased funding over the last number of years. So whether that will happen in fiscal year 22 remains to be seen. But my goal is that schools don't have to rely on, fundraising efforts or parent groups or outside organizations, that we're able to allocate the resources to each school based on their need.
Thank you for hanging in there with us, Dr. Ferebee.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. This question is actually for Dr. Curtis. Can you give any insights, ideas, words of encouragement, or suggested resources to educators and student caregivers about navigating the charged racial climate we are navigating?
For sure.
In particular, neighborhood violence, and violent policing in our communities.
No, so I absolutely can. And I would offer that one of the ways that one of the things that we should really consider, and let me make sure I pull this question up so I'm answering everything. One of the things that we should really consider in terms of navigating what's happening now is really just being as present as possible. So I want to go back to tomorrow in school buildings when we all get, in this virtual world. Yeah, see, my language hasn't even caught up with the reality. So tomorrow, when we log into Teams or log into Zoom and do the work that we do, it is going to be important to hold intentional space to talk about what happened in DC yesterday. It's certainly important to talk about, or the day before, it's certainly important to talk about all the realities of where it's important to talk about Breonna Taylor. It's important to talk about, Eric Garner. It's important to talk about every single name that should be named. But in DC especially, it is important because this is the reality. Somebody went to school with his cousin, somebody went to school with his I work with a brother who taught his older siblings, right? Like there's no separation in this city for sure. So really owning what they're coming in with is going to be extraordinarily important. Let me go make sure I answered the right. Suggested resources for the educators about navigating the climate. Absolutely. I would offer that we would do well to go back to old resources. The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Wretched of the Earth. I would offer those two in particular. The district actually just sent some of the adults in our building a multitude of books in its response to like really navigating the racially charged climate. And we went for old giants who were abolitionists themselves. So right now, it's cool to look at like some of the new stuff. For example, like Kendi is, yeah, right? Like if that is your lane, no problem. But I do think it's important to know that there are actual academic giants that have laid foundational work that quite frankly, a lot of us weren't even offered access to understand. So really going back now with no shame, right? Like if you never read Wretched of the Earth, I'm not mad at you, go read it now. And I guarantee you it will shift how you are able to show up in a school building and understand what these young people are having to deal with. And furthermore, it will help you see them better. In other words, if I can see your future, I know you 15, 16, 6, 7, you can't see it. You can see like what's right here. So if I can see your future better, then I can absolutely help you navigate some of this racially charged climate. It's a lot easier for me to have a conversation about how to talk to a police officer when I understand some of the intersection at play as you have to navigate that reality. And furthermore, as that officer is navigating that reality. So I definitely think going back to some of the old giants in abolitionist work is important. And I would also offer, in terms of this neighborhood violence, like really being intentional about leveraging some of the school resource officers or some of the people who we have connections with. So for example, our school resource officers, I have in my phone, like I can talk to them, I know them. They will absolutely get on a call and talk like street law. I don't know if that's like the appropriate term, but y'all know what I mean. Like they can explain, hey, listen, when I pull up, this is what I'm gonna do. Me and any of my partners, this is what I'm gonna do, this is how we're gonna operate, and this is what it's gonna look like. So you know what time it is. This isn't, it might not be for me in my school building to take like a whole abolitionist stance. Maybe, maybe not. What's most important though is I help equip these young men with the ability to wake up tomorrow and figure out how to navigate the world so that they can actually disrupt it. So all that to say, go back to the old giants. We all could use that, and these young people especially could. And then on the right now, really help equip them with some of the things that will help them navigate what's happening tomorrow. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel what you're feeling. It is not okay to be quiet and bottle it up. And let's make space for you to not have to bottle it.
Thank you, Dr. Curtis. I want to just note that we're shifting two things. One is 8:20. We tend to wrap our meetings around 8:30. So that means it's kind of like my last call to get in the chat. Second, I want to note that special ed, we have one comment and one question. The comment is from Benola, who is our vice chair and is on the line, and I didn't recognize earlier, so my apologies. It's a great way for me to recognize her as a resource, and she is a SPED teacher. She outlined the process for completion of the individualized learning plans above in the chat. She thinks it's important that parents know that teachers will do the best they can to get these important plans out, but teachers are overburdened with paperwork, and the IDOP's individualized learning plans will likely take time. They will be complete by 9:30, however. She hopes that special education teachers will not be thrown under the bus regarding this issue, because we, grace, hashtag grace. The question, I should also note, Nicole dropped her information in the chat. She is the specialist for people who have DC Public Charter School Board questions. So that is there. I see you, Allison, around preserving things. The question around special ed: how are schools and teachers coping with special needs students, such as students and parents with learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, where virtual learning and tools are problematic? So I don't know if Ms. Kennedy or Karla wanted to jump in.
Well, you go ahead and speak first.
Okay, I'm gonna say, well, I believe, so we even went today offering like manipulatives and things of that sort, something on kid grade level that they can actually hold up and do. Along with that, working to make sure that pictures are included. So for my particular population, I have young students with autism, so there's some definite cognitive challenges there, and the fact that they're not readers. To support their learning, we've been pushing for other tools other than what they have in Canvas and in Clever. And so the district is providing us with Boom Learning is what we'll have available to us. It's coming, not there, but it has a lot of pictures and even just a lot of virtual, so they'll be able to click on things and show their answers or just demonstrate their learning and understanding that way, rather than typing and writing.
In my introduction, you heard it. I'm a co-founder of Decoding Dyslexia DC, and we work to advocate to get rid of the limited access to educational interventions for students with dyslexia and reading difficulties. If you have a child that's having tech issues, you can give us a call, email us at decodingdyslexiadc@gmail.com, and I'll give you a call to give you information about assistive tech that you can access, and we'll also work with you to work with your schools so that we can sort of integrate everything together.
Awesome. I see Kareem agrees. Boom Learning is great, and I saw him nodding. There's also a response. He adds, in addition to differentiation apologies for individual kids by our SPED staff in pull-out groups. They plan with our lead teachers for push-ins and regular class time. That is especially true now that they are virtual. We also make sure that if a kid has a one-to-one aide, the aide gets lots of prep on how to make sure learning is comprehensible. We also have staff who are, that's the dog, who are designated specifically as distinct learning support staff that work along with our student support team to reach out to children and parents who are identified as needing support but are not necessarily on SPED caseloads. Question from Carson Carr, Commissioner Carson Carr: is DCPS using the science of learning?
Stop.
Does anyone know?
Stop.
Is DCPS using the science of learning?
I didn't realize I was still muted. That is something we are going to Ms. Carr, I've been taking note of the questions, so that is definitely something we'll have to respond back to. I don't want to speak incorrectly.
Thank you, Sharona, as always. Another question: does DCPS have some type of partnership with Nearpod to support SPED population? I don't know what Nearpod is. Do you, Laurine or Karla? Are you familiar with Nearpod?
gaining familiarity with it, and it is something, yes, that DCPS has partners. So we do use Nearpod, the Boom Learning, and there's a third one that they've kind of put in place that'll be a little bit of a support for students with disabilities. So Nearpod will be used.
Awesome, thank you. Nzinga, Kimber heard you. He is now quiet. Jimmy Williams is a Ward 7 resident, but he's also the chair of the Washington Literacy Center. So they focus on literacy across the board, and that includes adult literacy. So please use him as a resource. I see Karla has dropped her information in the chat. And I don't see any more questions. Karla, I know at the top you mentioned that you all were pushing some legislation. Did you want to give some background on that before we close out, in case there are people who want to know about that or ways people can support?
Yeah, well, you can reach us at Decoding Dyslexia, dc.org, or at our Gmail address. We hold monthly meetings, and we have speakers sometimes. Right now, our push is for legislation that's currently before the council to serve kids with dyslexia and other reading disabilities. And fortunately, even with COVID, we're still on track. It passed the Education Committee. Now it's going through the education half of the Committee of the Whole, and we expect it to go for markup in September. So, you know, we're going to need people to support it and make sure the council knows that it's really important. It's for training and intervention, training for teachers, screening, intervention for the kids. And we're going to fight for the funding.
Awesome. Thank you, Karla, and congratulations, because y'all have been working really hard around that. I want to make sure I offer to our panelists, we're at 8:28. Are there any closing thoughts that you all want to leave us with? No pressure, but I want to make sure if there's anything that you feel like is important to share and we didn't get to through the questions we asked, that you have the opportunity to do so. Going once, going twice.
Oh, I thought I was going to say something. All right. Well, again, real quick, I think again, as we're going through all this and we're trying to make sure that, you know, the kids are staying connected, you know, DCPS should be having another budgeting cycle coming up again, like they do every year. One of the things I always see is I'll be there, Ebony will be there. We won't have many other people there from Ward 7. We really do need Sharon will be there, of course. We don't have enough people there in Ward 7 to advocate for all these things that we always talk about at these meetings. So I would hope when that announcement comes out, again, we'll go and push that notification of when the meeting is to meet with Dr. Ferebee and the rest of the DCPS and let them know that all these things that we talked about, digital divide, computing, and everything else education-wise for distance learning, I hope to see everybody out there so we can advocate it as part of the budget process for the next sheet cycle, as well as then go down to the Wilson building and reinforce all those asks.
Awesome. Thank you, Antoine. And that's perfect timing. We are at 8:30, y'all. I just want to note that we actually have a tech survey that we have been sending out, and Zinga's been sending out. We launched that just to figure out how we can be a better support and another resource. If there are other issues that people are having or just want to reach out about what their experience is, please email our word7ed@yahoo address, or feel free to reach out to us on social media. We are pretty active on social media. We're not going to do announcements unless somebody has something burning. Because we are at 8:30, we typically do announcements, but this is a plug for our email list. If you do have flyers or other things to share, please again send them to that email address. Those could be things happening in schools, happening that are just kids things, other supports. Send them to us because we want to send them out. So I really appreciate everyone joining us tonight. I'm happy to let everybody go on time. I know if you're like me, you've probably been in front of screens all day. These aren't even like seeing glasses. These are I've been in front of the computer too long glasses that I had to order from Amazon. So thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank you so much, Ebony Rose and everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ebony.
Thank you.
Is it YouTube? Is that where it goes up? Where did the meeting recordings go?
So I'm waiting for y'all to leave so that I can end. I think I can end the recording.
And it and boot us too.
Okay, I'm gonna you know what I mean.
Just hard shut the door. Boom, done.
You just go, wee.